everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for a kitchen table talk with Krista Leddy. I'm Jessica Telford and I'm the marketing coordinator for Friends of Royal Alberta Museum Society, or FRAMS for short. We're very pleased to be co-presenting this talk with the RAM. Joining us this evening is Krista Leddy, who will be discussing the art of Métis beadwork traditions, with Elaine Alexie, curator of Indigenous Studies at the RAM. FRAMS is very proud to be the presenter of the Breathe exhibit at the RAM. We were able to provide our support thanks to the generosity of our members, donors, and friends. We thank them for their contributions. FRAMS is a charitable, not-for-profit membership organization in support of the museum and programs for all Albertans. We welcome you to become a FRAMS member and gain access to a year of fun events, discounts, and unlimited admission to the museum. Visit frams.ca to find out how to get involved. And before we get into things, I have a few housekeeping items to quickly go over. Along the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button. Please feel free to use the chat window to make comments. You can also reach out to FRAMS supports in the chat window if you have any tech issues. You'll also see a Q&A button along the bottom menu bar. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Krista, please enter them as we go into the Q&A window. Closed captioning is available. There's an option to activate or deactivate it along the bottom menu bar. At the end of the talk, you'll see a brief 5-question survey in your web browser. We would appreciate it if you could take a few moments to provide us with your feedback. And that's it for housekeeping items. I'm going to pass things over now to Elaine Alexie, curator of Indigenous Studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. Dringwinzi Shalakat, Insho Itli, Elena Laxi Vilji, Tetleche, Satgwichin, Watsatitu. Good evening, everyone. My name is Elena Laxi. I am a member of the Tetlequichin First Nation from Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories. I am the curator of Indigenous Studies at the Royal Alberta Museum, and I am your host for today's event. I'm so very happy to be here with you all today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all from Amiskwachi, Waskagan, Beaver Hills House, otherwise known as Edmonton, Alberta, in Treaty 6 lands, which is Nehewak, Nakota Sioux lands, and also the homeland of the Métis Nation. Welcome to this virtual kitchen table talk. Our special guest this evening is Krista Leddy, who will be sharing with us the art of Métis beadwork traditions. We will discuss how she incorporated this art form in her Breathe mask, Fighting Chickadees, which is on display at the Breathe exhibit here at the Royal Alberta Museum. Over the past several months, we have had the incredible opportunity to engage and speak with Alberta artists like Krista, also who are featured in this exciting exhibit. We are able to hear from them about their practice, their art making, while also celebrating their contribution to this exciting exhibit. Today's event marks our last virtual programming featuring Alberta artists that is in the exhibit itself. At this time, I want to welcome Krista to the virtual space. As I do with all events that I host, I like to invite my guests to the space and introduce yourself however you wish. My first question to you, Krista, what is your name and where are you from?
My name is Krista Leddy. I am a very ridiculously proud Métis woman. My family comes from the traditional Métis communities of St. Albert and Lac St. Anne. Now, my family has connections all over the Métis homeland, but that is where a large part of my ancestors lived, and that's where my Moshum and Kukum came from. I currently live in Edmonton, and I call South Edmonton home. Really excited to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you here. I'm just so excited to talk with other artists who also share a love for beadwork. Can you be able to share with us, the art of Métis beadwork traditions? How did you learn and how long have you been beading?
That is a really complicated question because I was always a crafty child and my cookum really saw that. And so the times when she would be taking care of me or I'd be spending time with her, she would try and introduce me to different ways of expressing myself through art and some traditional ways. She was not a beader. She could embroider. She was a knowledge holder. She's a storyteller, but beading, yeah, it just wasn't her thing. Instead, I remember being about 7 or 8 and sitting at she had this little table in her house, and 2 of her friends were over, 2 aunties were over, and they were going to show me how to do some beading. And so it was literally an entire day of, my girl, thread my needle. So that was my introduction, was how to thread a needle, an important skill. And, I still have some friends who call me up for tea, and I really think it's just because they need their needles threaded. It's just my way. So, there were stories, and there were exposure to different art forms and gifts from family, and seeing it in community, and learning some of those basic techniques, which was really fantastic. So that was like early on, and then you get to be a teenager and you're too cool for it, and it wasn't something that was accepted mainstream. So, you kind of just talked about it, in your homes and with your relatives in those communities. Because I grew up very urban. I grew up in Edmonton. And then as I got a little older and started having my own kids, I recognized how important it was to pass on those stories and those traditions. I was really fortunate that my kokum was still here when my first 2 girls were born. So learning those stories and learning just about the plants around us and symbolism and all of those beautiful things. And then I realized I had to pass it on. So I needed to pick up that torch and continue on. So while I had teachings when I was younger, when I started to do it again, I started to reach out to largely women that I knew that were already doing beadwork, and started learning from them. So kind of building that community. Yeah. I have to say the one that really kicked me in the pants to really get going again was my friend Raylene. That she gave me a lot of confidence in getting it done.
That's amazing. That's amazing to have a strong community like that, of support. And I know in the past you've been really active in the beading community, and some of the stuff that you have led was, beading circles. And you share with folks like the role of beading circles and why it's an important part of Indigenous community.
I always heard stories, and I got to see it, where women would gather together and they talk, and usually a lot of them would be doing something with their hands. They'd be making that creative piece, and the talk around the circle, around the table, sometimes it was gossip, sometimes it was stories. It was always about sharing, and it was such an important piece to building those connections. And so having the privilege of sitting together in a room with a bunch of people was really fantastic. And so I would try and create these opportunities where I was. I don't know, it's just, I think just being around it and then craving that, I would find spaces and create these spaces. Then when the pandemic hit, we couldn't gather anymore. And then it was about creating digital spaces to create those wonderful circles. And I have to say, while the pandemic is very bad, we are suffering, especially our people are sick and they're dying and they're suffering, and we're struggling. There is this very small silver lining of being able to connect with Indigenous makers I never would have connected with before. And a lot of that had to do with creating these online beading circles, these online places. It's been wonderful. Still maintain some of that today. So there's still a group of us that kind of meet every once in a while, and it's just wonderful just to sit, even if it's on Zoom, and connect and gossip and share stories and share techniques and learn from each other. It's a really beautiful thing.
It sounds so powerful and like so meaningful, especially when things are really challenging. You still come together as a community. You may not be there physically, but virtually the presence of being together with others is just as powerful. That's just
very much. And it's like we can gather in that and not be perfect. I think that's a really big one. So it's this relaxed, just talk and share what's going on and share it in a very real way. I think is so important, because we're not getting that. We're not able to share that energy with anybody, and it's really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to just kind of backtrack before talking about your incredible mask that you beaded for Breathe. in terms of your beading experience and how long you've been beading, can you share with us what is your most memorable project or experience that you'd like to share with us?
Okay, so I have to put this out here. I can do traditional beadwork. I still do traditional beadwork, but there's something about maybe I'm just too independent. I'm just too stubborn. As an artist, I share those traditions and I share those stories within the traditional patterns and colors and understandings. But I use the techniques that have been shared to me and the stories around respect and the stories of what's around me to create different artwork. And one thing that kind of like kept falling on my lap was this stuff called bead soup. I'm sorry, Lisa and Selena. I know you're looking at this and this is giving you anxiety. But bead soup is the most delicious soup in the world. It is literally just a mix of all of the beads you have left over from projects, bits, stuff you sweep off of your beading table. I even buy pre-mixed beads because that's just how ridiculous I get about this. And I just see Selena comment. You know, this is that whole point of these circles, that laughter, that joy. And, you know, I sometimes torture my friends. But anyway, I really enjoyed the challenge of taking this mishmash of beads and creating something really incredible. And I actually made a beaded chickadee, which is my handle on social media and the name of my art practice. And I created a beaded chickadee out of bead soup. And it was, that's what it, you know, the whole bead soup challenge that we created, all of that was from really this idea of using this bead soup. So it is probably not the most significant piece I've made to date, but to me, it just carries so much because it was like the blossoming of this bead soup and really challenged who I am as a maker by limiting what I could use, but I still created this really amazing piece. It now lives, I want to say in the US, I believe.
Oh, wow.
A wonderful connection was made. And so it was sold to a collector in the US. And I'm, you know, it'd be great to see it again one day. But I'm really happy that it has a happy home and is being appreciated. And yeah.
I think the bead soup, you know, when I was following you earlier on, you know, in as an artist, I kind of found like watching you work and watching you produce work and sharing it with the world, that was the most strongest signatures that I found about you, was how you were able to take bead soup, all these range of colors and hues and sizes, and you managed to find ways to just put them together so beautifully. And I just think that's amazing. And I find, you know, one day I will take you up on a bead soup challenge and I will do that myself, because I mean, just as doing beadwork, it's just so challenging as itself to find the right color combinations, to find the right ways in which you could match things. But with the bead soup challenge, I just find like it's just such a big signature of who you are. And some of the work that you've done, like the octopus one that you recently shared on social media. It's
actually a jellyfish. And it's
right
here.
Look
so this is a bead soup jellyfish, right? Totally non-traditional. I absolutely love it. It's even like three-dimensional. You can see like there's bigger beads and smaller beads. I'd love this. This is going to the framers right away. So it's going to be away from me for a little while. But this actually I made at the beginning of the pandemic. This was a really important healing piece to me because I really it was like a mental block, a creative block. Things were happening around me and I couldn't pick up my beadwork and do things because, you know, I had clients that needed or wanted things, had ordered things, and I had a hard time. And I needed something that was completely different and again, challenged me. So that came to life. This I made right before though. So this is a bit more traditional. I'm very low tech here. I'm just showing it on my camera, but it definitely has that more traditional Métis flower, that design you can see. But again, I use like some really awesome beads. And, you know, I really have to think back to our great grandmothers, however many greats you want to put back there, that, you know, for a lot of Métis communities, I mean, many people could bead. It wasn't really based on gender, but a lot of women beaded, and it was based around the time you had, the skill you had. And there were many women who made beadwork and traded it, and it was an important part of the livelihood for the family. So it was the economically powerful women who were making this incredible work. And I'm thinking today, I go to the bead store, I spend way too much money, but you know, it's just like, I'll have that and that and that, and then you end up with this, right? You end up with this ridiculous collection of beads. There's another shelf over here with more, but you end up with all of these beads. So the palette is so wide, and I mean, there are days where I'm like, there's too many. I need to decide what to use, right? But you know, this is incredible. I'm just thinking what our ancestors would have done with this kind of selection, right? But like the bead soup, this is my container. This is what I'm limited to. So it's almost like pulling some of that ingenuity. And, you know, how do you apply this to your work and to everything you do? It's like the ultimate problem solving. So you take the bead soup and you have to use with what you have.
Exactly. And what I love about the concept of the bead soup is nothing is wasted. You're using everything. And that's just brilliant, because I mean, I share a love of beads too. I have a bead collection.
I had no idea.
And it's always so wonderful going to the bead shopping, because I mean, the types of beads that they make today. But one of the things that I find so awesome about your work as well, your use of micro beads. For those of us in our audiences, can you be able to explain the difference?
Yeah, go ahead, ask the question. I'm just looking for them here.
Can you be able to explain the difference by, you know, like regular size beads, and then you get into the micro range, and then, you know, like vintage antique, like what are some of the ways in which you've explored the variety of different beads within your work?
Sorry, you got to see the back of my head, but these ones here, I'm going to try and show you, are really small. These are size 20 to 24s. So in beads, glass, so they're made out of glass. In seed beads, generally the size is typically how many beads fit in a certain, like an inch or whatever measurement. So the larger the number, the smaller the bead. I got turned on by the small beads literally as I really started to find that I really like beads. I really like glass beads. There's just something special about them. They're cold, but they warm up with your touch, the way they catch light, the way that they hold color. There's just something special. The weight, oh my goodness, when you wear something that like a jacket that's beaded, it's like, you know, the maker is giving you a hug. The ancestors are giving you a hug, right? All of those stories, it's so, it's magical. And, you know, yes, we use embroidery, we use quill work, which is so light and beautiful as well. But I don't know, there's just something for me about beads. And so I started, you know, researching more. How are they made? You know, I'm married to an archaeologist, so, you know, start talking about beads there. And then I'm like, I wonder if I can find these old beads. And there are these dealers that deal in beads. So like I can get a whole container like this of beads that, like, these ones are over 200 years old. It's incredible. I made this piece for Canadian Geographic, and it was Rainbow Louis Riel. A couple reasons I made him that way, but the beads that outline his face were manufactured at the time when Louis Riel was alive.
Wow.
So, you know, there's this connection, right, in the art. He was also done rainbow. This is, you know, my little soapbox here is that, you know, we don't do enough to support our LGBTQ2S people in our community. And that was definitely a statement, because I know our old beliefs, which, you know, I got to hear about and grow up around, was not, we didn't exclude people like that. In fact, communities are stronger because of diversity. So, but there's my soapbox. But these glass beads, that's what started. And it wasn't these ones, actually, it was another type of bead. And I got hooked. I absolutely got hooked. And so now I have a couple of different people that I buy from, and I try and add them to my pieces to make them that much more special. I'm working on a really special piece for a friend right now. And I know that he's going to appreciate seeing those antique beads in there, because that just speaks to that, those Métis ancestors and what they used and how they, not only survived and thrived, but just that self-expression, I think, is incredible. And just to bring a piece of the past to a piece that you're wearing now, it's really special.
That's beautiful. That's how you just illustrated, you're making that direct connection, to your ancestors in ways in which people think about, it's how I wear it. It's how I express myself, and it's reflected in how, beads bring that to life. That's just beautiful. Wow. I absolutely love your work. I've always loved it. And I want to personally thank you now, because you're the one that introduced me to microbeads. So
you're welcome. We should do some more swapping soon.
Yes. Incorporating it in my work, it's just been like, it adds depth, it adds texture, it adds things that I've never considered before. And it's just, yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you, Krista, for sharing that with the world.
The trick is finding the needles, right?
Yes. Yes.
Anyone who beads out there that knows this, it's the needles. It's always the needles. But Elaine, it's also, I think, just that story. We're all about stories. Like, those of us that come from this space, our families were all about stories. That's how, science was shared. That's how history was shared. That's how, mathematics and our form of literacy, all of that was shared. And I think those beads, those tiny little beads, help continue those stories. And that's so important, because we've lost so many of them. So we need to keep telling stories that we have, but also create new ones that are for our descendants. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your beautiful mask, your Fighting Chickadees. One, it has many things to it, like not only the beadwork form, but you also incorporated, the sash ties, and it's just a beautiful array of color and exposition. But what is the story behind Fighting Chickadees?
I think first I'm going to talk about the structural part of it. I used a mask design that is utterly useless. So if you actually make a mask out of the pattern that I have, it's useless. It's big and gappy and doesn't do anything. And this was a design that was shared by one of the big American newspapers or news outlets. They shared this pattern because everyone started making their own masks. Secondly, I chose this wool that if you if you see the mask, when you should go see it, when you go see it, in some light, it looks like it's almost so dark blue, it's black. And in other light, it looks purple. And it's this beautiful wool, and it's like repurposed wool. It's just amazing. The ties are finger woven, which is a traditional way for Métis to make sashes and fabric. And I made them out of the scratchiest, itchiest, awful wool that I could find. This is all just about, the design of the mask. There's also beadwork on the inside of the mask where the straps are attached. So if you were to wear it, it would like scratch your skin because it's not smooth round beads. It's really sharp cut bugles. So it would be very uncomfortable. The only, I think, soft part of the mask is the hand tanned deer edging that I used around the edge. And the chickadees themselves, it was interesting. There was a Facebook group, called Breathe, started by Lisa Shepherd and Natalie Burton. And Lisa had messaged me and she goes, you gotta come try, you gotta come be part of this. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So conversations, and it was like, okay, so I got to make this mask. And I had ideas, you know, like trying to make that political statement about this mask that doesn't fit and doesn't work and whatnot. But I'm like coming up with this traditional floral Métis design, and I just wasn't feeling it. You know, like I was saying, with this, creating this was so healing. It was like getting me out of that rut, getting me out of that space. And I'm like, no, I need to make a statement. I gotta create something that helps me to feel. It helps me to deal with everything going on. And what really inspired it was how we were fighting for resources that we didn't need to fight over. Do you remember the toilet paper fiasco? It was just shocking. People were freaking out over, you know, sensationalized news, over, you know, social media, people just spinning things, and they'd sucking up all this toilet paper. And I remember an elder contacting me and saying, I don't have toilet paper. And I'm like, you know, right before all this happened, I'd been to Costco. I got a big old bale of toilet paper in my basement. So it's like, here, have some toilet paper. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And it's just because this elder wasn't able to go anywhere to maybe find, you know, some toilet paper. And then yeast, you know, the shortages. And it just seemed to be this cycle of things. And then just kind of like the misinformation and everything. But it reminded me of watching, I love birds, obviously, and sitting and watching birds at the feeder in my backyard and chickadees fighting over seeds. There's a giant container of seeds. There's so many resources there. There's enough for everyone. And they're battling each other over who gets to pull the seeds out. And that was that inspiration. It was like right there. That's it. It's those chickadees. And then using the bead soup, first of all, it's kind of my thing there. But it was really, again, about that. You have to use what you have, and it's enough. The beads I used to make the birds came out of this bin, you know, and it was enough. And so that's where that comes from. It was just about our own ridiculousness and our own things that we should be embarrassed and ashamed about, that we were selfish and we were not supporting each other. And in this kind of time, we need to support each other. We still do. We're not out of this. We still need to help each other as much as we can. So it was just the whole statement about that.
And so how did you, once you created it, once you finalized and put the final stitch on that mask, you know, how did you process that? How were you able to get from point A to point B in terms of finishing that mask? Once it started, you know, you start going through it, you start conceptualizing, oh, this is what I have in my mind. And, you know, what was that like for you to get to that endpoint?
It was, I have to say that last little bit of putting the last bit of the mask together was hard. And it was right up to the deadline. I don't know, something about it. It was like, it was almost done and it was sitting on my beading table and it was just sitting there. And it was difficult to go and pick it up and finish it. And then when it's like, okay, deadline, I need to get this done. I picked it up and I finished it. And I was probably more careful on those final stitches than I would have been had I finished it a month before. Everything was so purposeful. The last bead I put on there, the last tie off, the last twist on the finger woven straps. It was difficult, I have to say, because I finished this piece that comes from my soul, and it's like I'm bearing my soul, and I felt like I had to mourn what was going on around me. And I also had to reflect in myself, what, insert bad word here, you know, stuff did I do that I should also be critical of. So it was a really tough one to do, but at the same time, it was so freeing. I was able to kind of like let that go, and it was healing in that way. And then when, you know, they submit the pictures and everything, and when it was chosen for the exhibit, it was, I have to say, I was afraid to open that email, and I don't know why. But when it was accepted for the exhibit, it was so kind of like, there's this deep sharing, and I was so happy for it to join the exhibit. And then seeing it with all of those other masks, first of all, every artist does this. You get this total imposter syndrome of like, my mask is crap. Why is it here? It doesn't fit. But it does, you know, and I think there's this beautiful story within the whole exhibit of all these different masks that tell these different stories and perspectives. And yeah, it feels like it's at home. It's in the good space. It's in the right space. Yeah,
for sure. Can we be able to show, this is just, I'm asking my cue to the tech person, can we be able to just show the video that Krista shares of her beading, just to kind of give a little more understanding of, you know, beading and how long it takes. And I understand here, I'll let you talk, Krista,
sure,
about what you're doing here.
So here I'm actually working on a different piece. This one I did for the Métis Nation of Alberta for the New Dawn Métis Women's Society, and it's a floral infinity. It's on a book cover. And here I'm using antique beads. And this was one of those, again, those big heart projects, because this was so much meaning. I mean, it had, I think, just a little bit more meaning from the chickadees, but it was just as healing. I am using a 2-needle method, which has been passed down to me. It's a method that was born out of necessity, and it's complicated to learn at start, but it's really great way. Like, to me, this is that's just how I like to bead. I'm beading on velvet, not just any velvet, silk velvet. Here I thought I hit maximum Métis beading level, and I don't ever want to bead on that again. It was really tough.
Yeah.
Shifting and moving around. But yeah, so it was, again, taking a lot of those really, the traditional materials, the traditional techniques, the beads that, you know, that those great-great-grandmothers would have used to create something beautiful and something that's a modern expression of Métis culture and Métis identity. Yeah.
So it's aside from, like, you know, having the materials, and you mentioned doing the 2-needle method, and, you know, learning the 2-needle method, you need to hold your needles a certain way, the tension of them, you know, the way it holds. So it's a process. It's for a lot of Indigenous artists and beadworkers, like, you know, time and investment in these pieces are really holds true, so close to your heart, you know, you sharing parts of yourself that with the world. And I could understand, you know, how you were feeling in the early stages of coming out there, getting out there, but it's just a gift to share with the world. And I think that's just something so powerful about the Breathe exhibit, is that, you know, you have all these amazing works of art on display, and they all have their own unique stories. And I want to back up to, we talked about briefly about the role of beading circles, of coming together in community, that healing aspect, especially at the time of COVID, right now in the pandemic. What was it like to be in that space, that supportive space that the Breathe Project provided to everyone who participated during COVID?
I think the biggest part was knowing you're not alone. You know, talking some of the other artists that are in there. Like, I know some of them before, and some of them I met during, and it's been amazing. It's wonderful. I think there's a connection there between all of us artists that will last a very long time. But you're not alone. And while the details of the situation you're in may be different, the feelings, the struggle, the sense of loss is shared across the board. And, you know, we all, what I love too is that all of the artists in the Breathe Project, they're not all Indigenous. It's this beautiful array of diversity and different stories. And yet we all come from these different places and have different worldviews and different experiences. But at the same time, the pandemic and the Breathe Project, I think, offered the same sense of connection and healing that don't think would have existed otherwise. So if that makes sense, it was, I have to say, even like going to see the exhibit, like I did see it at the White Museum in Banff, saw that right before they shut everything down. It was a snowstorm too. And then seeing it at the RAM, each one had their own life within how the masks were arranged and how they were displayed and how people could interact with them. And I have to say, it was different, but magical on both sides. It was very powerful. And I think seeing all those masks together, just again, brought back all of those conversations, even just, comments on the Facebook page from these different artists on your piece, and you're commenting on other people's pieces. It brings all that back and gives you a really, really powerful sense of community.
So what kind of impact that experience and being part of the Breathe project, had on you as an artist, a creator? And now that your work is being exhibited now across Canada, it's going to be traveling to many different places. How has it impacted you?
So as me, as little Krista Leddy sitting in her basement, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? It's incredible. As an artist, it's been a wonderful opportunity to share my work and get my voice heard. Also understanding the process a little bit more. I have to say that this has been a wonderful opportunity for, I think, because many of the people in the Breathe exhibit and on the Breathe page are emerging artists, or are, they've been doing their practice for a long time, but not necessarily on that mainstream market or the mainstream display. So that has been really wonderful to have a really supportive group to help all of us kind of go through that. It's definitely made me a lot more courageous in maybe some of the art I'm going to be producing and showing soon, and has really, to me, I think, opened the eyes to the rest of the country, the value of many different types of art forms. You had made a comment earlier about all the time and skill, like, oh man, my fingers cramping, my hands cramping from, like, you have a piece, it's a big piece, and it's like sitting on the edge of a table as you're sitting there holding with one hand and stitching with the other, and your one hand cramps up. But just, the knowledge and the skill around, like, placing each stitch, knowing the material to use, knowing the limits of the beads and the limits of your thread and limit of the material. And then, of course, all the stories. We need to stop undervaluing our work.
Absolutely.
Okay? Seriously, we need to stop undervaluing our work. And I think the Breathe Project was another big one. I think a lot of us had to take a step back and like, what is my work worth? And then realizing, wow, our work is valuable and it's powerful, and it tells amazing stories that many people understand, and it deserves to be out there. It needs to be out there. This Breathe exhibit, the fact that is going to go all around the country and hopefully globally, the idea that this story is going to be told everywhere, it's because it needs to be told. It's this beautiful sense of perspectives and coming together and building community. And that's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. I just said absolutely. Everything what you're saying is like amazing. Yes, absolutely. Like, it's to be celebrated, and to what I so appreciate about the Breathe Project is just that very lens of diversity, the inclusion, inclusivity that, brings together many different artists in ways that you're celebrating it. And it's just amazing. And I absolutely love, when we're curating this, preparing, in terms of looking at the stories, looking at how powerful each and every artist has to say. that's what I find so amazing about it, is just that perspective and that angle and that projection onto the world. You have this, all these deep reflective messages about why art is so crucial in this time, you know, this difficult time of the pandemic.
I think it's
And
more
how
than
art
just,
feels.
sorry. I think it's
Oh, go
more
ahead.
than just the pandemic. Art is such an important way for us to reconnect to culture. I spend a lot of time teaching beadwork and other traditional arts. And, you know, there's a lot of people that are non-Indigenous that come and take classes, and I teach a very particular way towards non-Indigenous folk. And I teach a very different way towards, especially like Métis, but I also teach a very specific way to Indigenous folk. And it's, you know, like there's a whole Louis Riel quote about, you know, the artist waking the people up in 100 years. And then I was watching this presentation with Maria Campbell Scott and Tony Belcourt, and she's like, it's the artists that are bringing our people back. And it's like, yes. And art, it's how we, I think it's like languages and words we don't understand, but when we see art, it just tells so many more stories in so many ways, but also gives us a sense of connection that I think words never can.
Mm-hmm.
So artists out there, go and do your art. Tell those stories, make it, show it off, embrace it. And we're never ever happy with the end result. Like I look at Fighting Chickadees now and I'm like, oh, I could have totally done better. I could have done that, or I could have added that, or why didn't I do this? But you know, this is what we do. We get caught up in our own heads. But please go tell those stories. Show your art.
Absolutely. What would you like people to take away about learning about Métis beadwork traditions?
You know, like there's this whole sense of like teaching Métis culture. So I want to go into this big, long dialogue about where this comes from and how we express ourselves. But really our artwork, you know, we're known as the floral beadwork people, and it's because we have this very organic sense of art. So of course, you know, like the flowers and the plants and all of sometimes the animals that come with it. And there's certain styles depending on where you're from and your family. Like, you know, Manitoba Métis art's a little bit different than Alberta Métis art. And I could go on for days. But I think for me, it's just, again, our art tells stories about connections to what's around us. I mean, that's going to boil it down to that most basic statement. It's around like this is Métis art. It's not flowers. It's not, you know, traditional, but still Métis art. I made it. This is an expression of the stories that I carry, that I share. And by the way, we're always still learning. You don't know everything. You still have to learn. I'm learning every day. But this is still, that's an expression of the world around me. Now, have I swam with the jellyfish? No. I'm inspired by the jellyfish that I see. I've seen them in zoos and I've eaten them. You know, yeah, you know, it's an important part of how we're connected. Even this piece, right? This is an expression of those stories. This is an expression of, again, that connection to the world around me, but in a very different way. So that's, I think, the most important part of Métis work, artwork is expressing those connections. We're more than just relationship between people. It's with land, air, water, plants, animals, everything.
I love that. I guess my final question to you before we jump into the Q&A from the audience is, what advice would you like to give to other Indigenous folks interested in learning, like, say, beadwork?
Try it all. If you have an opportunity to try something new, do it. You may love it, you may hate it, it doesn't matter. Just try it all. Find different ways of expressing yourself. If someone says, you know, hey, there's like a beadwork thing, give it a whirl. If someone says, hey, there's a tufting thing, give it a whirl. You know, like, what does it hurt to try it? If someone wants to do a birch bark thing with you, try it. Take those opportunities and encourage your relations to try it too. I mean, you don't have to be great at anything, but you just have to do it. And it's about you. It's not about what other people think of it. It's about you. It's about your ancestors. Like I always say when we do bead classes, you know, when someone's like, I've never beaded before, but I know my cookum used to. And I'm like, and you know what? Your cookum is like so happy right now, whether she is here or not. She is so happy right now. I'm going to get teary thinking about this, but seriously, you know, you're going back to the ways that those stories were told and the connections we have. I think it's really important. Art is so powerful in that sense.
One quick question, adding to that on that theme, what advice would you give to non-Indigenous people who are interested in beading, and the difference between appreciation versus appropriation?
Woohoo! Okay, first of all, we do not own the art of putting shiny bits of things on other things. This is a human thing. It's about what you do with it. So remember I was saying how I teach non-Indigenous people a certain way and then Indigenous people a different way. Take the technique of putting the shiny bits on the other bits, but make sure what you're doing is your story. So the things that you make are a reflection of who you are, not somebody else's story. It's your story. Now, if an Indigenous maker makes beautiful earrings, and just, you know, sing, you know, and they make these things and they're up for sale, buy them. You're supporting an Indigenous person, you're supporting an artist, you're supporting their practice, you're feeding their children, you're paying their rent, you're paying for their gas. Do it. This is their livelihood. And then when people say, wow, that's gorgeous, and you say where you got it from, it's okay for non-Indigenous people to wear these items that we make. Legitimate Indigenous artists aren't going to sell sacred or ceremonial things to people that shouldn't have them. They're going to make beautiful art that they want people to share. We're sharing our culture in a very authentic and safe way. So please buy it. Support us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. It's just such important things for people to think about and to share. One of the questions that we received from the public here is from Karen, and she asked, how long did it take you to do the beading on your mask?
You know, I was trying to go back because I had an estimate and I think it was like 20 hours or something. And that was really hard to estimate because there was a lot of like working on it and putting it down because I needed to walk away and then come back and work on it and put it down. And then sometimes, and I think a lot of makers feel this, you get into the zone and you're just like, and then you wake, you know, you kind of realize, oh, it's 6 hours later, I need to use the washroom and I haven't eaten all day, right? Like, you know, you have these moments. So I want to say probably 20 hours-ish if I had to put it all together. There were a few parts that I took apart, put them back together because I didn't like the look. And do you add that? Is that legitimate? I'm not sure. Yeah, it was a fair bit of time.
Awesome. Our next question, how do you practice self-care? Like, you know, with beading, you know, it's straining on the eyes, you know, and, you know, it could be, it could add pressure to your wrists, to your fingers. It could, you know, so how do you as a beadwork artist practice self-care? And just thinking about, you know, what advice would you give to other people in terms of, in order to produce work, we need to be diligent about the way that we treat our bodies as well.
I just have to say, I did see a comment pop up from my dear friend Dawn Marie, who said it was like 35 hours, and she's probably right because she did see me go and stressing out about it a fair bit. So self-care, are we talking about the healthy way or the not healthy way? The not healthy way, unfortunately, is buy more beads and then things. I'm like, I'm going to make a new project. It's going to be amazing. I just amass this stuff. And I think in a healthy way, it's finding time just to reconnect with what's going on outside. So going for walks, taking those moments to enjoy the details. Some people, if they follow me on social media, they'll have like random photos of what the sky looks like, random photos of wood texture, random photos of like, you know, flowers and things like that. And I'm enjoying the texture and the colors and the way it looks in the light. And those moments kind of help re-energize. But I also find there are moments where I just need to put the beadwork down and go do something different. And this is unfortunately where, you know, Krista goes and buys a loom and learns how to loom, and Krista goes and buys a Cricut because Krista needs to take a break from beadwork, you know. But I mean, this is a big piece. Is I'm a creative person. I have to do creative things. So the self-care is just shifting gears for a little while, you know, reconnection and shifting gears.
Do you have any tips for folks? Like, I know for me, you know, lighting is really important. You know, I have all these different lamps that I have. And do you have any tips?
Yeah, the older we get, we need to be kinder to ourselves. So it's I actually sometimes now wear a little wrist guardy thing on my hand if it gets crampy, but I have so many lamps. Yes, lamps everywhere. Lighting is so important. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten the bifocals and the whole bit. You know, the glasses are fabulous, but they are there for function. Magnifying lamps, just trying to find different ways to help. And that's, you know, just my physical self. So yes, take care of yourself, and don't be ashamed to try those things that just help, and always bead in good light. I think that's a mistake I've made too. And then you drop beads, you know, you try and bead in bed. Don't bead in bed, it's bad. You drop needles, your poor partner rolls over and jumps and hits the ceiling. You know? Good thing my spouse isn't watching this.
Yeah. My final question here is, do you have a favorite bead size and thread?
Ooh, okay. So I have to say a little bit of advice. Use the materials, like the best quality of materials you can afford. And so, you know, if all you can afford is the dollar store beads that are made in China, use what you can. So I have like certain things I like to use for certain projects. Like I have my Czech beads, which are like buying like a Dodge or a Ford. And then I have my Japanese beads, which is like buying a Lamborghini, right? Like you get what you can use. My favorite sizes of beads are small ones. Shocking, I know. So I do like 15s, especially Japanese 15s. Yeah, those are my favorite. Thread wise, you know, I'm kind of like, I'm not too much of a thread snob. I do like the Toho. I do like the Miyuki. I like, you know, the run of the mill stuff, just as long as it's going to stand up to the wear and tear of the beads. And needles, definitely get the best you can. So I'm a John James needle fan. I mean, I have tulip needles. I just can't justify spending that much money on a needle. Sorry, tulip lovers. You know, you got it, do it. You got it. Just enjoy it, right? Everybody's a little different. And I have to say, like, some of my favorite material to work on is repurposed material. I go on my trap line. It's like my urban trap line, just going to all the thrift stores. I buy my leather coats, I buy my fur coats, I buy the wool, you know, it's amazing what you can find. And sometimes it's a challenge of like, how can I repurpose this? Because I love this color, right? Yeah.
That's brilliant though, because I mean, I've seen really old, you know, sewing and beadwork from our ancestors, and they used everything that they had. You know, they repurposed things and they remade things to live a different life. And so, I mean, I kind of feel that you're continuing that in your own way, and that's just brilliant.
I think that's, again, like our whole beading style was out of necessity. And I think just that value of repurposing has just been passed down. You know, there's a joke about the frugal Métis. Well, it's not really a joke, it's a reality. Yep. We'll just stop that out there.
Yeah. Well, Krista,
we're not going to talk about me nitpicking over 10 cents, but
yeah. Yeah. Oh, Krista, this has been so wonderful, and we're coming right up to the hour. I mean, when you get into these discussions, I just wish it won't end, and we're coming up to the hour, and this has been just so wonderful. And I would like to say masicho, Hi, Marcy, to you for sharing your knowledge and discussion today on your beautiful art making, and especially about sharing your knowledge about Métis beadwork traditions and giving people a different perspective of what that looks like, you know. And also, you know, sharing your beautiful story about the Fighting Chickadees. That's still in the Breed exhibit right now. So for our audience members who have not seen this exhibit yet, you still have time. The Breed exhibit at the Royal Alberta Museum is set to close soon and will be on display until next Monday, October the 11th. Come check out this amazing display of handcrafted masks, including Krista's Fighting Chickadees. You can pre-purchase tickets online at www.royalalbertamuseum.ca. A reminder to Indigenous folks that admission is free. I'd like to say a huge thank you to FRAMS, the Friends of the Royal Alberta Museum, for co-hosting this virtual event, as well as the other events that we had with the other Alberta artists. They played a huge part in supporting Breathe exhibit itself by, you know, enabling it to come to Edmonton, enabling it to come to Alberta. So thank you, FRAMS. A huge thank you in presenting alongside us at the RAM in bringing Breathe to Edmonton. So Masi Cho to everyone. I'm really thankful for you being part of this discussion with me and Krista, joining us around the kitchen table and sharing stories that just, you know, enlivens and enlightens the community so much more. And I'm really happy that you're part of it. So thank you all for joining the event this evening and have a great evening.
Marcy, thank you.